Welcome to the session. As Jason said, Steve Kaplan, Vice President of Customer Success Finance at Nutanix, better known on Twitter as @ROI-Dude. Over a period of 20 years, I started, ran, and ultimately sold 2 award-winning channel partner businesses. The first focused on Citrix and the second on VMware. And rather than use conventional sales methodologies, we would use financial analysis, ROI, TCO, to help our customers evaluate disruptive technologies like Citrix, like VMware. I considered Cisco UCS to be disruptive back in its day. In fact, what you're looking at is the fall 2012 edition of Cisco's magazine. This is from the cover story, Getting Real with ROI, which was about the financial analysis work I did for Concentra Healthcare, headquartered in Dallas. And that's me in the middle, speaking with Suzanne Kosub, CIO of Concentra. And Suzanne had told me, Steve, for years we've been trying to get the monies we need to expand our small VMware environment, but the most we can get is $15,000 to $20,000 at a time, not enough to even make a dent. So I worked with Suzanne's staff to put together a comprehensive ROI analysis that I thought had, fantastic results. But Suzanne told me, Steve, we're owned by a private equity company with extremely stringent financial controls. We need more. When Suzanne and I presented the results to the senior management and a couple of the board members, of course we went over the numbers. But what we emphasized was that Concentra, this big company, was running on a backup generator. And that the air conditioning was a total mess. It needed a $1 million overhaul. But even that, with the hot Dallas summer months approaching and an ever-increasing demand for more servers, was still no guarantee at all. In fact, it was a good probability they would suffer from downtime, which would, of course, been devastating to the business. And if Suzanne were here, I think she'd tell you something like, that was an amazing meeting. After years of struggling to get monies and drips and drabs, we essentially got the verbal approval on the spot for the millions of dollars we needed to virtualize our entire data center. Well, after selling my second business, I moved up to Lake Tahoe, where I envisioned this nice, cushy consulting career. And shortly after moving up, I get a call from a friend of VMware VCDX. Hey, Steve, I joined this hot startup. I think you could be a good fit. Come interview. Well, I wasn't really looking to go to work for anybody. I just moved up to Tahoe, but I met with the startup, and it turns out that they had taken the same type of architectural idea pioneered by Google and in the public cloud space and adopted by everybody in public cloud of taking all the intelligence out of proprietary storage array, out of SANs, and running it as a distributed file system across commodity servers, aggregating the local storage. So storage turned into an application. And when they told me about this technology, I was blown away. And I'm thinking, if this worked, this would change the entire enterprise IT industry as we know it. But then I started thinking, this is a 50-person startup. How often does a 50-person startup have even a prayer against the handful of global multi-billion-dollar giants that have completely dominated not only the data center for the last several years, but as I knew full too well, also the reseller channel. So I didn't join, but as I watched Nutanix's explosive growth over the next year, I became increasingly convinced that they had a real chance of pulling off what could be one of the business upsets of the decade. So I gave up my dream of a cushy consulting career, went back to work 70 hours a week at a startup. And that was going on almost 8 years ago now. But it's been this extraordinary opportunity to participate as Nutanix unquestionably has changed the industry. The technology it pioneered, it became known as hyperconverged infrastructure, or HCI. It's now become a data center standard, and it continues to just grow like crazy. And Nutanix long ago joined the ranks of the billion-dollar firms. Over the years, I've been very fortunate to co-author, along with senior technical architects, 5 books on Citrix and 3 on VMware. And I wrote the business parts, and my co-authors all told me I wrote the easy parts, which was probably true. Well, last year I came out with my first solo book, The ROI Story, A Guide for IT Leaders. Mark Templeton, the longtime CEO of Citrix, graciously wrote the foreword. And the book is geared toward helping IT professionals utilize a financial analysis framework, not only to evaluate disruptive technologies, but for the ones that make sense, then how do you build a compelling business case in order to help galvanize organizational consensus in order to get the money you need to actually deploy the new technology. In my book, I make the claim that the legacy data center model, the SAN-based data center model, is broken. And I give several examples supporting this assertion. This is my favorite. This is a tweet by Mustafa Kali, who authored the book Storage Design and Implementation in vSphere 6. And an excellent book. Mustafa bragged that he fit all 1,242 pages in one volume. I mean, 1,242 pages. This is a big, thick, heavy book. Pre-pandemic, when I used to travel, I would lug it along with me as a prop. It would fill up over a fourth of my suitcase. One time I had a TSA agent search my suitcase because he didn't believe me when I told him that big object was a book. Now, in contrast, the Nutanix equivalent to storage design and implementation in vSphere, because about half of our customers run vSphere, is a 22-page tech note. So this 1,220-page delta represents not just all the complexity of legacy SAN-based architecture, but also of all the cost that's inevitably associated with that complexity. Even more concerning is it signifies an inflexibility and inability for IT to rapidly deliver the innovative new services and offerings that the business is demanding for its customers. So let's look at the challenge of SANs from a financial perspective as shown by this chart. Let's say that you're going to buy a new SAN. I mean, I don't know why anybody would buy a new SAN or an array today. In fact, just yesterday, an article in SiliconANGLE stated the days of selling storage controllers that mask the deficiencies of spinning disk or add embedded hardware functions, those days are gone. But let's say for whatever reason you're going to buy a new SAN. You have to try and guess what resource requirements you're going to have 5 years down the road. Then you have to buy a SAN with enough excess capacity in terms of storage bay size, in terms of storage controllers, so that you can reach those resource requirements 5 years down the road. Because if not, you face a forklift upgrade that is very expensive and time consuming and complex. I mean, you're going to face it anyway in 5 years. And I'm assuming, you know, the end of life for the SAN is going to be 5 years. So you're going to face it anyway. But of course, you don't want to face it any sooner than you have to. So as the chart shows, you buy this SAN with this excess capacity you're paying for upfront. And you also got to, now it's taking up rack space, it's taking up power to run and power to cool. And because that SAN is proprietary, you just can't do a firmware update that's going to, you know, bring it up to present. So essentially, the whole thing starts depreciating the first day you put it in. And by the time that excess capacity is fully utilized 5 years down the road, assuming you make it that long, it's become really old technology. Now, hyperconverged infrastructure, HCI, completely turns this model on its head. I mentioned HCI as a standard today. Every leading storage manufacturer offers one or more HCI solutions, and there are dozens of other manufacturers as well. I don't know how all of their models work, but in Nutanix's case, customers can start with as few as 3 nodes and then grow as quickly or slowly as they want, and performing linearly. So the same performance with 3 nodes, with 300, with 3,000 nodes. And as you expand out your footprint, because of Moore's law, because technology is improving, it means that the hardware is getting faster, it's getting more capacity, so that the number of virtual machines per node continues to increase. Now, on top of all this, you're eliminating all the storage administrative tasks for both the SAN and for the storage network. So there's no LUN carving or switch zoning or RAID group management or volumes expansion. 100% of the storage tasks go away. So you add that together with the reduced OpEx costs because there's no excess capacity and you're starting really small, and the reduced CapEx over the time of the environment. And it makes a very compelling delta typically between the legacy SAN-based architecture. And on top of all that, there's no risk that you ever face a forklift upgrade. If after 5 years, for example, you decide to replace your 5-year-old HCI nodes, you can do it in just minutes and with no downtime, very simple, and of course, no risk. When I joined Nutanix, it was actually to start our channel partner business. In fact, we were very small back then still. So for all intents and purposes, I was the channel partner business, at least until we started hiring like crazy a couple of months later. But it didn't take too long for former clients of mine to see my title change on LinkedIn, and they were calling me up asking, you know, what is a Nutanix? And one of those was Bob Orkis, who at that point had joined Fairway Independent Mortgage Company as CIO. And Fairway in those days was much smaller than it is today, but it was still very fast growing. So fast, in fact, that the converged infrastructure system, they bought the granddaddy of converged infrastructure, is called vBlock. They had already filled it up after just a year. And you know, after just a year, they couldn't justify doing a forklift upgrade, throwing the thing away, even though that would probably make more sense. So instead, they're looking at buying a second vBlock, despite all the management headaches that would entail. And so Bob asked, when I told him about Nutanix and HCI, he said, hey, can you give me a TCO comparing buying that second convergent infrastructure system versus buying HCI? So that's what you're seeing here. Just like today, we show the results on a cash flow basis year by year. In Fairway's case, we looked at the cost of the hardware, the software. We looked at planned expansion costs for both scenarios, especially important in Fairway's case because they're growing so fast. We looked at the rack space, power cooling. We took a really, almost a ridiculously conservative approach to administrative savings. And we didn't even consider the business impact at all, something that figures prominently in our analyses today. But despite that, Bob was impressed enough with the projected $928,000 in 5 years savings that he took a gamble and was then a very young and small Nutanix and a very new technology and brought it into Fairway to run a certain niche case. Today, Fairway runs all of their production and DR environment on hundreds of HCI nodes. Cloud, of course, public cloud has huge momentum. AWS alone, you know, since they came out with, Amazon came out with AWS in 2006, last quarter they did $11 billion. So you combine this momentum of public cloud with all the challenges of and cost and complexity of legacy SAN-based architecture, there's a lot of pressure for organizations of all sizes to shift to public cloud. In fact, in my conversations with organizations across the world, I'll often hear, you know, we have a cloud mandate, or more common, they'll say proudly, we have a cloud first policy. Well, as an analyst, I like to take a step back and examine people's strategic decisions. So my question to everyone making this leap is simply, why? What research and analysis went into making this choice? And I've heard answers ranging from the CIO told us to do it, to the board thinks it'd be a good idea. The most common one, we want to save money. But rarely are these reasonings backed by data or critical thinking about the most cloud smart decisions for the business. And public cloud is expensive, at least for predictable workloads, which just so happen to make up the majority of workloads for most organizations. IDG Research did a study, the State of IT Modernization 2020, where they found that nearly 7 in 10 organizations experienced higher than expected cloud costs. The Flexera 2020 State of the Cloud report says that 82% of organizations struggle with managing cloud spend and are over budget by an average of 23%. And this isn't just a question of being smart. You know, NASA, which of course is full of rocket scientists, according to this article in the Register, earlier this year, they negotiated a $65 million a year contract with AWS, but they somehow forgot about data egress when people download data back off of their site. So now they got to pay an extra $30 million a year on top of the $65 million a year. Hey, Jason, let's go ahead and run our, let's run our first poll.
Okay, folks, no worries. I'm going to launch the poll now. Apologies if you're unable to see this. For some folks, it doesn't seem to work, but I'm going to launch the poll now. I'll leave this up for about 30 seconds and allow as many people to participate as possible. Justifications for disruptive technology. IT leaders should be proficient in building justifications for disruptive technology. This is a must. That's what we have finance people for, or who wants disruptive technology. Run this for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's take a look.
Awesome. So, wow, 89% say it's a must. Cool. Well, you can get a free copy of my book to maybe help with that.
Okay, I'll stop sharing now.
All right. So in addition to the high cost of public cloud, there's lots of other problems too. And I'm talking about cloud native here, directly with your public cloud provider. There's performance and resiliency issues, because you're running shared infrastructure, you can get noisy neighbor, you can get slowdowns. In fact, a lot of organizations have to go to a much more expensive tier of storage in order to get the IOPS they need. And of course, today, there's the resiliency issues. Google Cloud was down a few weeks ago. Azure, AWS East was down. Azure had lots of challenges last year. So, the cloud is not invulnerable to resiliency at all. Cloud migration is so often underestimated by organizations about just what it's going to take, how difficult it is. Last week, I heard about a CIO who wants to move all 14 of his data centers to public cloud over 5 years. Well, my first question, of course, is, have you done an analysis that your CFO's looked at and, knows how much this is going to cost the organization? The second is, how realistic, even over 5 years, is it to move all of your applications to public cloud? That's pretty rare for a large enterprise to be able to do. Security, you can have a phenomenal on-premises security governance and policies and so on that you've built up over years or even decades. Does not translate to public cloud where you have an entirely different type of attack vector. A good example of this, an unfortunate example, is the Capital One breach last year of 100 million records. And, they were an AWS poster child, and yet, they got an $80 million fine and all of the other repercussions that come with this type of breach. And it all stemmed from simply a misconfigured server. Public cloud is complex in lots of ways, ranging from tools to invoices that can run dozens of pages. Public cloud, again, public cloud native is very inflexible, it's immobile, it's a cul-de-sac. You go to a public cloud and you learn their tools, you write to their APIs. But what happens if they start competing with you? They start their own financial services business, or they maybe they raise their prices just a little bit, but for your particular workloads, it really tends to hit you hard, or they're having trouble meeting their SLAs or security or whatever. You're pretty much stuck. It's very, very difficult and expensive and time consuming to move back out. Even mundane concerns like accounting rigidity, the inability to capitalize your public cloud contract costs. Some of you may know, or at least have heard of Tim Crawford, strategic CIO advisor. Tim was the one who introduced me to Sync almost 15 years ago now. He tweeted earlier this year, and I really like this tweet, that when you're looking at migrating to public cloud, until your last workload leaves your on-premises data center, you better be prepared to pay for both environments, the cost of your on-premises environment and then the high rent of public cloud, at least for predictable workloads, and of course the staff to manage both environments. IDC did a large study, 2,211 enterprises in public cloud, published mid last year, and they found that 85% of the respondents had repatriated one or more applications back out of public cloud, and IDC projected that 56% of all lift and shift applications will come back out over the next 2 years. I recently did a podcast with Simon Taylor, CEO of Haiku, the backup vendor, and he told me that 40% of our data migration as a service offering has been used by customers to move data from public cloud back to on-prem. Last month, Nutanix came out with our third annual Nutanix Enterprise Cloud Index. This is a survey and a report compiled by the research organization Vance & Byrne. They surveyed 3,400 IT decision makers from across the globe. And they found that 86% of them, was 85% last year, 86% this year said that hybrid cloud is the ideal operating model. And this is echoed or mirrored by essentially every analyst report I've read. And earlier this year, I wrote an article for Forbes talking about why you should use a financial analysis to determine the optimal hybrid cloud strategy. And organizations have many different approaches to hybrid cloud. What Nutanix does is we've taken our hyperconverged infrastructure software and ported it to public cloud. And what that does is it essentially abstracts public cloud. So that's why I kept emphasizing native. You're running an abstraction layer. And VMware has a similar type of product. And we did an analysis recently for an organization, giving them 5 different scenarios. And the one on the far right was running this abstraction layer, Nutanix clusters. The one on the far left was running 3-tier architecture. And as you can see, at least for this example, the abstraction clusters was a little bit more expensive than the legacy SAN-based, was a lot more expensive than the on-premises HCI, and was still millions of dollars less expensive than public cloud native. You can also use the financial analysis to mitigate this pervasive and tenacious status quo bias, especially when it comes to evaluating disruptive technology. For example, let's say you ask your staff to evaluate a new disruptive technology. Well, perhaps the IT person is close to retirement and he doesn't really want to have to learn a new technology and go through all that trouble, or somebody else has years of relationships with legacy vendors she values, or somebody else has built her career around legacy certifications she's achieved. She doesn't want to see all those go away. So when you have these types of personal agenda, especially in kind of an informal evaluation setting, it makes it difficult to get a fair analysis. And I believe this is certainly the minority of these personal agendas, that by far and away, most IT professionals are genuinely curious about new technology. They want to learn about it. If it makes sense, they want to bring it into the company, into the organization, even if it's at their own discomfort. But even then, they're subject to what we call confirmation bias, which is the tendency to look at disruptive technology through the status quo lens of what we know. As an analogy, imagine we could go back in time 30 years and we see a would-be taxi passenger standing miserable in the rain, fruitlessly trying to hail a cab. We go up to her and we say, hey, in 30 years, there's going to be new technologies, the internet, GPS, smartphones, and there'll be ride-sharing companies like Lyft and Uber, overseas, Grab, that will transform your transportation experience into something simple, predictable, and even pleasant. Well, she would probably lack the context to really understand what we're talking about. Through my many years of evaluating disruptive technologies, I find the same type of thing happens. For example, even in Nutanix's case, today, even 9 years after pioneering HCI, we'll still commonly get questions from procurement and even IT, what is your cost per gigabyte or per terabyte? Because that's how we measure storage. And it's a great metric, again, if for whatever reason you're buying a SAN or a NAS, but it makes absolutely no sense in a hyperconverged world. Another good example, the whole virtualization lifecycle. When I started my VMware consultancy in 2005, early 2005, the biggest objection we would hear from IT professionals, you will never put my production server into a virtual machine. Now we laugh about that today, right? And yet, Gartner, who is in the business of projecting IT trends, saw what was happening with virtualization in public cloud years ago. And going on 4 years ago now, March of 2017, they retired their Magic Quadrant for virtualization. Just doesn't exist. And today, every leading public cloud provider and some hybrid cloud providers like Nutanix, while we all support these commercial legacy standalone hypervisors, for our own customers, we offer Linux-based hypervisors that are integrated into our software-defined stacks, and they're scalable and they're resilient, and they're so much simpler. There's no separate management tier. You have to buy and set up and configure and figure out how to scale and how to make redundant. There's no certifications required because it's so simple. So using a financial analysis helps shed a spotlight on status quo bias, on confirmation bias in a formal setting so that you can get the analysis, the evaluation up to the decision makers so that they can make the best decision for the organization, whatever that happens to be. I oversee at Nutanix a team of business analysts across the globe, and we work with organizations to help them evaluate and quantify disruptive technologies like public cloud, hybrid cloud, of course, Nutanix. And we also, though, have what we call Project Superhero. And that's where we go to existing customers who've been running our technology, and we do a look back analysis. How much have you actually saved in hardware and software, in administrative costs? How's it impacted your IT staff churn and quality of life? Now they no longer have to spend weekends doing upgrades and so on. How's it impacted your business? I mentioned FAIRWAY earlier. We did an analysis for them, published earlier this year, got permission to show these results. And for the first 5 years of running HCI, they saved over $10 million. More importantly than that, FAIRWAY is still extremely fast growing. In fact, they're now one of the top 3 largest private mortgage companies in the United States. Bob retired, but the new CIO, Randy Allen, credits Nutanix with being integral to enabling their continued growth. We did a look back analysis for Seattle Children's. And in their case, what we did is we quantified the cost of their downtime. And we knew exactly what that was because they track it. And we showed them that when they went from legacy SAN-based architecture in 2016 to HCI in 2017, that their cost of their downtime decreased from almost 30 million to essentially 0. Nutanix's award-winning CIO, Wendy Pfeiffer, says that to relax about the technology and focus on the business. And I couldn't agree more. Well, we're not always successful at this. My team always strives to understand what the business objectives are. And that's especially, I found, true in financial services organizations. And once we kind of at least identify those business objectives, then we'll try and map them back to IT initiatives, then ultimately back to the disruptive technology. Jason, let's go on with our last poll here.
Great. All right. Launching now. IT and business alignment. Launch the poll. Okay, folks, if you can see, please get involved. How aligned is your IT staff with the business? We work in lockstep all the time. We try to provide appropriate feedback to their requests. We're still waiting to get introduced to the business. Okay, let's run for another 15 seconds here. Allow as many people to participate as possible. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Interesting results. Okay, let's share them. There you go.
Yeah, that's great. That way over half are working lockstep. It is not uncommon for our team to talk to IT about what the business objectives are, and they don't really even know. So we kind of have to start the conversation there and help figure out what they are and how to quantify them and work our way back. So great results here. Thank you. I don't care who you are. If you work for the organization doing the analysis, if you work for a manufacturer, a channel partner, a consultant, a research organization, whoever it is, in order for that analysis to be taken seriously, in order for it to actually, assuming it makes sense, compel somebody to act, it has to have credibility. And so some of the ways that we encourage credibility is complete transparency. Don't have these muddled formulas or hidden formulas. Be very transparent with all the calculations. Use real numbers whenever possible. When not possible, use assumptions and document those assumptions. Emphasize business outcomes if you're able to. Support all the numbers and any assumptions behind them. Keep the audience in mind. Who is going to be reading the analysis and who are the decision makers and what's going to resonate with them? What are they wanting to see? The scope is really important. Typically, when evaluating a disruptive technology, the larger the scope, the better the economic outcome is going to be. However, the larger the scope of an analysis, the harder it is to do. It takes more time. It's harder to get all the data, collect the data. It's harder to get all the key stakeholders aligned and get meetings with them. And, so it's a balancing act. And finally, it's key to tell a story. As was the case with Concentra, even compelling numbers probably wouldn't have been enough to galvanize them to act, and never had before, on virtualizing their data center. And I've seen this true over and over again with disruptive technology. So find the pain points, find the emotional hooks, and then tell a story to grab the audience and compel the decision makers to actually act and deploy the new technology, again, where it makes sense to do. So with that, let's go ahead and open up for questions.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. I'm just going to stop sharing your screen here. Okie doke. First question that came in was all good points coming from Ian. Sorry, on the chat feature here. All good points. But what about the innovation public cloud brings to us?
Innovation public cloud brings to us. So I guess I would interpret that in two ways. One is, what are the innovative capabilities, the new features that public cloud continually introduces? How do you bring them to us? And two ways. One is to use public cloud where you want to use those innovative features. The other is to use private cloud scenario that also has those features and capabilities. And in that case, it's a question of which one makes the most sense economically. Do an analysis. And, as I mentioned, for public cloud, typically it's going to be the elastic workloads that make the most economic sense to put in public cloud. When a workload is predictable, when you know what the resources used are going to be on a predictable case, it's going to make a lot more sense internally. Now, if you need some type of capability that just doesn't exist internally, it's only in public cloud, then absolutely use the public cloud for that, because business outcomes easily trump cost savings. That being said, cost savings can be very significant. We've seen organizations save hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars by shifting some of their applications on-prem instead of running in public cloud. I guess the other way to look at that question is, how is IT inspired to be innovative via public cloud? And I would argue that really getting away from SAN-based architecture is the most important thing. Again, Wendy Pfeiffer, Nutanix CIO, I mentioned her earlier, she says that something like, I'm paraphrasing, but when you spend 70% of your time and money on keeping the lights on, that doesn't leave much time or budget for innovation. So you got to get out of the legacy proprietary SAN-based data center model and move to cloud, whether that cloud is an operating model, whether it's on premises or in the public cloud.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Another question here. Big data and advances in technology have been dominating the discussions of many financial executives in recent years. What will the future look like?
Hey, say that one more time. I don't see here about the dominating, the beginning part.
Yes. Big data and advances in technology have been dominating the discussion of many financial executives in recent years. What will the future look like?
Well, I would say AI, certainly. Machine learning and AI in particular will come to dominate more and more. The whole fintech movement that's small today, but certainly shows signs of continued moving. I think agility, time to market. I know those are topics today, innovation, but they're going to become more and more crucial as time goes on. That financial organizations to thrive and dominate are going to have to increasingly become more innovative, more agile, more open to new technologies. And some of the world's largest organizations, I know financial organizations have a not invented here syndrome. They want to write all their own software. I just don't think that makes sense in today's world. Where things are changing too fast, and there's too many billions and billions of dollars other people are pouring into it, that you want to utilize the best of breed instead of trying to do it all internally. That's my take.
Fair point. Another question here, actually from one of our friends north of the border. How do you account for ups and downs in usage? Elasticity is is critical for us seasonally. So how do you account for ups and downs in usage? Elasticity is critical for us seasonally.
Yeah, I think that's where this whole hybrid cloud notion really, shows. I mean, there's so many benefits, it's hard to limit it to one use case, but in the bursting type of capability. Now, there are exceptions. I was speaking with the CIOs for the California state agencies a few weeks ago, and one of the agencies needed to spin up 200 hosts, not VMs, 200 hosts in minutes, and then bring them down again. Well, clearly that's a public cloud scenario, purely public cloud. I would still argue you're better doing it on an abstracted layer than public cloud native, and you will reduce your cost in that. But for other organizations that have seasonal types of ups and downs, as long as your hybrid cloud model enables the ability to burst to public cloud seamlessly and using the same operating model and IT governance and tool sets and management of both, that's kind of an ideal world, because then you're paying for the minimum cost for your workloads on-prem and you're bursting as need be in the public cloud. The other thing is that, if that model, for whatever reason, is not really lending itself, you want to be pretty much all in public cloud for that use case, or mostly in public cloud, then you at least want the ability to spin down the workloads when they're not being utilized, automatically port the data to an inexpensive medium like S3 and stop the charges, or stop the expensive charges, and then make sure that with a click you can rehydrate those VMs, bring back the data seamlessly, and be up and running again.
Great stuff. Martin asks, Steve, justifying IT spend is always a challenge. Are you finding that with COVID that this justification is more challenging, or are the C-suite starting to listen more, particularly with transformations being front and center?
Yeah, it's a great question. Certainly in the beginning of COVID, I think there's more attention than ever on kind of saving, just straight out saving cost. But I think there's been a real shift now, as with so many things from the pandemic, where people are taking a longer term view now. As just one simple example, it wasn't financial, but a healthcare organization got the mandate to go to work from home, and they're all set to buy 10,000 laptops for their employees. And instead, we got the opportunity to do a financial analysis for them, showing, what if we didn't buy 10,000 laptops? What if we bought inexpensive Chromebooks, or used their home PCs, or whatever the case may be, and we went to a virtual desktop type of environment? What would that look like? And the savings were astronomical, not even including the actual user savings and productivity savings and all that. So I think we are, and I know my team is swamped. We got a lot of work out there from organizations who are more open to this now. I think the other thing that's kind of prompting this is, at least in our case, and I would say in VMware's case too, this abstraction layer I talked about, the ability to mitigate the inefficiencies of public cloud, like, the t-shirt size instances you have to fit your VM into. And if there's any resources left over in terms of vCPU and memory, on premises you can use those. In public cloud native, you can't. On an individual VM basis, who cares? But when you start aggregating that, they come to a lot of money. Well, an abstraction layer, because it's running in bare metal in public cloud, you're able to utilize those instances. Same type of thing with vCPU over subscription, and with storage efficiencies, and with Hibernate, and so on. All these types of capabilities now for people to go to public cloud and do all the wonderful things of cloud mobility and same operating model and same IT governance, but then also to just reduce their public cloud spend, I think is putting more attention on it. But from my perspective, all analysis is good analysis. The bad thing is when you don't do it. Like I actually truly don't know if the CIO did this or not, but the example I gave, the CIO who wants to consolidate all 14 data centers, I suspect no analysis was done. Because that's what I commonly see. And I commonly see weird things out there, like, a CIO or CTO would tell me, we want to be 65% in public cloud by 2023. And I'll say, where does that figure come from? You know, where's the analysis backing it? Let's just pull it out of thin air. And this, you know, going to cloud is more than just spend. It affects every single part of the business and all the operations and all the governance and even the organization's future in terms of agility and scalability. So, you know, I want people to do the analysis, do the math, and chips fall as they fall, but at least then they can make a decision knowing what they're getting into.
At least somewhat, right? Without further ado, I would like to give a virtual round of applause and ask everyone to join me in doing so for Steve. So thank you very much, Steve, for your time, for your insights, and for answering those questions.